guest today is Dr Lou Drofenik. Lou is a renowned author here in Australia, and it's a pleasure for us to have you on our program, Lou. Your publications, we could say they have quite a few things in common, but the basic ones would be migration and strong and resilient Maltese women. Would you say that migration stories as well as Maltese women would be your inspiration for all your publications?
Oh, absolutely. I just love Maltese women's stories. You know, Maltese women are so brave and resilient and passionate, I think, that's the word. And their stories have always inspired me since I was a little girl. You know, I grew up in Birkirkara, and there were my aunts who were dressmakers, and all the women used to come and get fitted there, and they used to tell stories. They used to tell amazing stories about their husbands, and they used to whisper, and I was always sitting under the table listening, building up a store of knowledge of what was going on in Malta.
Why do you think Maltese women are so strong and resilient?
I think because they have seen a lot. I think they have suffered a lot. You know, they had many of them had many babies dying, they had lots of pregnancies. So I think they worked things out among themselves, and there was always a lot of support. You know, the women's network was amazing. The neighbors, the women, if they knew a woman was pregnant and she didn't have she didn't have a lot to eat, they would go with the Borma and they'll give her a plat. You know, a bit of minestra or agine or so, you know, they'd give her some pasta. My mum was always giving, even though she had very little herself, she was always giving someone else something. So I think there was a support that we don't have here. Women supported each other, and that I think their strength came from their networking. That's what I think.
Lou, tell us more about you as an author. When did you decide to put pen to paper back then? Were you still young, or did you do it at a more mature age?
Well, I was always writing, and my mum used to say, "You are wasting so much paper. You're always sharpening pencils." I used to write and write and write and, you know, throw things away. But I always had stories in my head that I wanted to write. I wasn't very confident in writing long novels, but after I did some study and I did creative writing courses and did a master's in creative writing, so I really needed that foundation of study to help me to say what I wanted to say, what was in my heart, really.
In fact, you're not just an author, you're also a poet. So do you feel that you can express yourself more in poetry or in a novel where you've got more sort of time to express yourself?
Well, I think poetry is very different to, you know, the inspiration is very different. A poem comes to you in a flash, and you have to sit down and write it straight away, otherwise it goes. I think the poetry really comes. I can't write poetry. I don't write very good poetry in English, really.
Oh, so you write in Maltese?
In Maltese. My poetry is in Maltese. I think I feel more, you know, I'm deeper in Maltese. It's still with me. But with novels, I don't think I have enough vocabulary to write, you know, 120,000 words in Maltese.
I know that you came here on a scheme that was called the Single Women's Migration Scheme, Migrant Scheme. Tell us more about that scheme and how you actually got onto it and your migration story after all.
All right. Well, the Single Women's Migration Scheme was a scheme set up by the government of Australia and the government of Malta, and I think Italy too.
This is going back to the year?
In the 60s. And it was because there were a lot of young unmarried men in Australia, and they needed women. So they said, okay, we will send good Catholic girls to Australia, to marry our men. And I was teaching at Jiwi Primary School in those days, and I can remember, it was a lovely May day, the sun was shining, and I thought, I'm trapped in this country, you know, I need to go away. So at lunchtime we're looking through the paper, and I saw this advertisement, and I applied for it. In August I was in Australia.
Oh my gosh, but you came here and you didn't marry a Maltese man, in fact.
No, I tricked them.
In fact, Drofenik is definitely not a Maltese name.
No, I married a Slovenian man. I went to a dance in Ivanhoe, and I met this most handsome young man, and I fell madly in love with him, and that was the end of the story.
And how long had he been here for?
He had been here for 2 years.
So he was still fresh himself, fresh off the boat.
And he couldn't speak English either. So that was very hard because, I could speak English very well and he couldn't speak English, very little English. And so, love conquers all, I think.
Of course it does. Let's talk about your latest publication, The Confectioners Daughter. Tell us more about how it came about and the story. Well, maybe not the whole storyline, but give us a glimpse into this publication.
Well, The Confectioners Daughter, I always had in my head a strong Maltese woman who was a baker. Juditha is the confectioner and she has a daughter, Licia. Juditha is a strong Maltese woman. Licia is a weak woman. She marries and she raises a daughter who comes to Australia. So the story is connected between Malta and Australia, and it spans 100 years. So there's a lot of history there too.
Your books sometimes, they span decades. The storyline spans decades. And also you have a lot of characters included in the story. Sometimes I get a bit confused when I'm reading any of your books. How do you organise those characters in your mind?
Well, first of all, I do a lot of research. I read a lot. I read history. I usually spend Mondays at the State Library doing research. I go to the archives in Malta and I research, I read a lot. So that's the history part of it. But the characters, really, writing a book, the characters they tell you their story themselves, they work themselves into the story. It's not hard really, because when you write a story, they come to you, you don't go to them. They talk to you, they become part of your family, you live with them, you fall in love with them. It's like a love story. And I feel bereft when they go. It's like falling out of, like a marriage breakup.
That's right. That's right. You're breaking up with these characters.
Yes, I am breaking up with them.
To move on to the next characters. Which brings me to the question, what are you working on at the moment?
At the moment I am working on a book. Actually, I am editing. I finished it. And it's about the time of the Inquisition. And I'm looking at a love story that happened in those days, and it's connected to now. It's going to the past and coming to the present.
Now tell our viewers about your books. Where can they find your books?
Well, the latest book, The Confectioners Daughter, it can be found only in Malta because it was published by Horizons in Ormi, and it's available in the shops in Malta. So all those who are going to Malta on a holiday, look for the book and buy it.
Yes,
because
definitely.
It's a fantastic story.
What about the other books?
The other books, some are available on Amazon. Some have sold out completely.